Yes, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. Again, I'm Hyacinth McKinley. I'm joined here today by Elena Cohen, who is our subject matter expert for our trauma-informed approaches learning community group, and she's going to be talking to us today about how to conduct an assessment to become a more trauma-informed organization. So what is the purpose of the learning community? What is the purpose of all these learning community groups and webinars that we host? And it's really to help the network as a whole identify outcomes and effective anti-poverty practice models that will help us build our capacity to fight poverty. And this is important for us because we are community action. This is at the very heart of what we do. This is why all of us come in every day in our different roles. It's really to help build capacity, and it's also to move families out of poverty. And in that same train of thought, we always like to recite the promise of community action at the start of all of our events, just to get us centered on why we come together for these various web meetings and the different events that we all do. So it states, community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. All right, so one of the things that we do in the learning community to help you all learn about these innovative strategies is hosting national webinar series events such as this one. So with that, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the very capable hands of our presenter today, Elena Cohen. She is a consultant that works with us on our trauma-informed approaches to alleviate poverty learning community group. And Elena, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, some of you it may be good morning, but good afternoon to all of you. This webinar today is a follow-up of many, several, I think it's been 5 webinars before on the issue of trauma-informed practice. And I'm going to start by having a poll, because I do not want to be repeating a whole lot of questions, a whole lot of issues, and cover some of the areas that have been covered before, for many reasons. One of them is because, that would get us to the main and key objective of this webinar, which is, how to go about becoming a trauma-informed organization. And the second one is because all of the webinars have been recorded and are posted in the website. So if there is all of these topics that we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to be asking you now, we have talked about them, we have given resources, we have talked a lot about them. So if there is any one of them that you would like to have more understanding, or that you need more resources, you can go back and look at that. So the first thing I want to ask you is, today as we start this conversation, how would you describe your own level of understanding about the following questions? And I would like you to rate either high, medium, or low.
All right.
So it's what is trauma, adverse childhood experience, toxic stress. Then it would be the prevalence. What is the prevalence of trauma in the communities that you serve? The impact on adults, adolescents, children, families, and communities, the impact on staff, services, and outcomes, and what is your level of understanding at this moment of how can you begin as a program agency to move towards becoming more trauma-informed? And if you are already implementing some of the strategies that we've been talking about, how much do you know, what is your level of understanding about how to move forward from where you are to where you want to be? So
about 10 more seconds, so if you haven't done so, please finish out with the poll, and then we'll see the results on the right-hand side of your screen. All right, the poll is closed. Give us a few seconds, and you will be able to see the results of your colleagues here on the webinar. All right. Would you like me to go ahead and read those?
Sure, please. I can't see them, so.
It's a little funny, but it looks like most of you said that you have a pretty high understanding of what you feel trauma is, adverse childhood experiences, and toxic stress, so that's good. Just under half the people on the call said that. So that's pretty good. About the prevalence of trauma in their communities, most of you said that you have at least a medium understanding of what's going on, so I think that's helpful as well. Good to hear. Next, about the impact of trauma on adults and at various stages of life. Most of you said that also you have a pretty good understanding of that. Next, asking about the impact of trauma on staff and also program outcomes and service delivery strategies. Again, many of you said that you either had a medium or high level of understanding, which is good.
Great.
And finally, our last question, how can you move to make programs more trauma-informed? Most of you actually said that you either have a medium or low understanding. So I think that gives us a good idea.
That's really very helpful. So I will skip on the describing what is trauma, on how stress becomes trauma, the types of trauma, and as I said, all of these, if and when you want more resources and want to know more about it, are already on the website, or you can send us a chat and I'll send you those resources so that you can deal with them. The important issue about this that I would like to if we go, Shandy, if we go to the one that says the prevalence, just the prevalence one, although all of you or many of you have indicated that can we make that a little bigger? That you have a pretty good sense of where that the impact of trauma on the prevalence of trauma in the communities that you're serving. I just want to make very clear the point that I would bet to say that most of the populations that you're serving have been affected by trauma, because trauma is so very common among all of the populations that you're working with, both children, adolescents, and youth. And so that you can be almost certain that trauma is impacting most of the population that you serve. And the way that we know that, there is a high prevalence and the impact is very, very high is because most of the studies have been done with kids or adults that are either in the mental health system, in the child welfare system, in the juvenile justice system, in the special ed education programs in the schools. And that's how we get to the numbers that you see on your screen right now. However, many of the folks that have been impacted by violence in the schools, in the communities, and very especially in the homes, domestic violence, are not part of our systems, don't get to the system, so that the numbers that sometimes we see on the screen or that sometimes we hear about are not even visible to us. And that is one of the reasons why you can be sure that if you are becoming a trauma-informed organization, you're actually serving better your communities, your outcomes, and very especially you're impacting on the outcomes that you have for the programs that you have. What does determine, I mean, is the prevalence of trauma or adverse childhood experiences on our population is so high, what is it that it impacts very much on, or affects very much the impact that the trauma is going to be is going to have on the population. As I said, if we were to take a poll, and there has been some surveys, very scientific surveys about the impact, the prevalence of violence exposure, but what is it that gives homes that are exposed to violence a stronger or worse impact than to others? The very, very first one is early occurrence. We know that the earliest time that kids are exposed to violence, the most impactful their effect will be. This is very important because we see, for example, in terms of homelessness or in terms of child abuse and neglect, kids are exposed to violence. The younger they are, the most likely they will be exposed to violence in our communities. As we move along, the second one that is a very important one, and this is one of the reasons why we want to become a trauma-informed organization, is the impact is on folks that are silenced or are not believed. You all have heard of instances, and we certainly have heard it in the press and in the TV a few days ago, that many people do not believe either kids that have been exposed to violence or women or adult males. So the being silent, not being able to speak about or to get a response, is one of the factors that increases very much the impact. There is a wide-held belief that kids younger than 5 or 6, before they really are able to talk and to express what they're what they're seeing and what they're feeling, do not suffer from trauma. How could they be traumatized if they cannot they don't understand what's happening? And that has been demystified, and it is not true. You can be in utero and have a reaction to trauma. The younger the child is, the most impact that the trauma will cause is if it affects the caregivers or the parents or the caregivers, because those are the ones that the child depends on. But as we go along, not having a family, not having a community, not having a service system that understands what you're going through, and that you may not even know that you're going through as a child, but having somebody silence you. It is also common to hear people saying, oh, he or she is exaggerating. That's not exactly what happened. This is not the way it is seen. If we go back to what we talked about when we talked about the definition of trauma, every person reacts differently to events. The way that your life history, your current circumstances, your environment determines how you're going to respond. So having somebody saying that you're exaggerating, that that's not what happened, and not believing you is a very important factor in increasing the negative impact of trauma. And the other one, which is very close to what I just said, being silent or not believed, is the blaming or shaming. Making the blaming the victim, is one that usually is here meant by. And the closer the perpetrator is, the closer the perpetrator is to the violence or the trauma, the most important or the most negative the event will be. So for children, adults, and youth that have been exposed to violence, response is what makes the difference. So you have an event or you have a trauma trigger, which means that you see an event or you experience an event that is similar to the one that caused the trauma before. If there is a non-response, if there is a blaming response, if it's a non-informed trauma response, the most likely is that there will be a negative outcome. If there is a trigger and there is a trauma-informed response, it may not be immediate and it may not act as a one solution, but the greater chance of a positive outcome. It has been shown by research that when kids and adults are exposed to trauma and they have a trauma-informed response, the likelihood that they will have a positive income and that they will be starting the process of healing is a greater one. And here I just want to talk a couple of minutes because it's obvious that when you're talking with an adult or a child, when you work with adults, when you work with children, the response is definitely a different one. A trauma-informed response in the classroom is going to be, or in a daycare or in a nursery, is very different than the one that you're going to have in a domestic violence or a homeless shelter. So many of what we're saying and what we'll be talking about today are sort of general principles and areas that we need to make our organizations trauma-informed, but with very careful attention to what is the age, the environment, the outcomes that your program are looking for, etc. In general, we say that in a trauma-informed approach, we go, the goal is a model that goes from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. So when a person, a child, an adolescent comes into your service or is into your classroom or is in your homeless shelter that you're serving or wherever it is that, and you represent a very large range of service systems, we change our approach to what we're doing from what's wrong with you. You remember when those intake forms, all that we want to know is everything that's wrong with you and not to what happened to you. Looking at the history, looking at the environment, looking at the community that you live in. So promoting a trauma-informed agency is because of the fact that your population, and I venture to say that you are a community action agency, your main focus and your main outcome is reducing poverty and making the community a better place to live. Whatever services you're providing, the underlying fact that you are working with low-income families to help them to attain self-sufficiency indicates that any one of the agencies that you're working with, the outcomes of your program, whatever the outcomes are, whatever you legislatively or funding related you are going to be improved by promoting a trauma-informed approach, because you're going to be reaching a larger amount of the populations, and you're going to serve them more according to their needs. And the second one area that is going to be very important in terms of benefits is going to be your staff. If you begin and implement a trauma-informed agency, one of the key areas of work that you're going to be doing is supporting the staff, who most probably also has been impacted by violence and exposure, by adverse childhood experiences, by trauma. So the fact that your staff will be more stable, more satisfied is definitely something that's going to be your agency. It's going to give your benefits to your staff. I'm going to stop for a couple of seconds to tell you, I think Shandy talked about this when she started our conversation, is that one of the things that the Community Action Partnership is doing is they're organizing learning community groups. And with that, they have a series of topics that agencies are working together to implement, and one of them has been trauma-informed, and to promote a trauma-informed practice. And 2 years now, we've been working with a group of agencies, about eight agencies, to implement a trauma-informed approach to their practice. And as we started our journey a year ago or so, we asked every one of the staff what was the reason for them wanting to join this community of practice, and what would be their most important goals. All of them, of course, said to provide better services to their families, but I would say 99% of them said that what they wanted to do is be able to support their staff in a better way. And so if you are interested in understanding better what this community of practice has been doing for the last 2 years, on May 25th, we're going to have a report out of all of these communities that have been working, what were the things that worked, what did not work, and so it'd be good for you to listen to it so that you can understand what the community of practice has been doing. The reason I bring it up is because all of them said that what they wanted was to support their staff. That was the most important issue. So in terms of benefits is, of course, the kids and families that you're serving, the outcomes of your program, and the support for your staff. Those, I think, make it worth for you to start, to convince your leadership and to begin the process of doing this. Implementing a trauma-informed agency and practice is a very complex area because it involves the reevaluation of the whole agency. It is moving from one place with one philosophy to a different model. As I said, it's going from what happened to you, which is what we use many times in our service systems, to moving from what's wrong with you with what happened to you. And so many of the agencies that have been doing this and have been trying to begin this have decided that they are going to go step by step. They're going to break the big project of becoming trauma-informed into looking into different areas of the program that needs to be changed, and beginning with one of the areas and then following up. And in order to do that, I think that what we've observed in the groups that we've been working with, and the literature certainly talks to that, is that before you even start, there needs to be a team which is a multi-level team that includes executive and managerial staff, frontline workers, recipients of services, as if their ages so allowed, and in the case of very, very young children, the parents or the caregivers of the children. The multi-level team is designed as a small group that includes representation from all of the agency departments that will bring in a perspective on where they are. Then the idea is to do a needs and a strengths assessment. And the assessment of the agency, there are several already published assessment tools, and I have given you some of the resources that are specific to either homeless agencies working with homeless families, Head Start, child care, daycare centers, mental health agencies, and other agencies that are working with different kinds of content and looking for different data. So Depending on that, there are needs assessments that are published there. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. They're there, but the areas that we are looking at, the areas you will be looking at, is an important one because it will tell you where the program or the agency is in terms of all of these areas that they're looked at, and we will look at the areas right now, and where do you want to move to, and also because it's a needs, but also a strengths assessment. How can you use your strengths, the strengths of what your program brings to the effort that to build on and to supplement the areas that you need to do. For example, there are agencies that already have a system of a schedule and a system of staff trainings. Well, then that's a very big strength, and it is a strength because for programs to invest in the training of their staff is already something that not all of them can do, but if they can do it and if it's already there, it's easier to look at what are the needs in terms of trauma-informed practice. So the needs and strengths becomes a very important area to look at. The other part where needs and strengths assessment is very important is that many of the areas in becoming trauma-informed that you are going to be implementing are areas that are already in place. I'm going to put as an example, if you have a Head Start or a child care program, many of the areas that we're going to be talking to teachers and to caregivers about, how to deal with infants and toddlers or how to deal with challenging behaviors in preschoolers, etc., are probably areas that you already have in place. Now, the issue is going to be how do you put this in the context of what you're doing in trauma-informed. And it's important to build on what you have and to let also all of the staff know that many of these things are already being done, because if not, what they have, and we have heard that from some of the programs, is that, oh, trauma-informed is the new kid on the block, is one more thing that they want us to, especially the federal government wants us to implement. It's just, yesterday it was one thing, now today that's the new the new trend. And really it is not about trend, because it is something that you already are doing and that has been in place. What it is really looking at what we mean by trauma-informed and what we want the agency to become, and use what we're already doing to supplement and to do what we need to do less then. After you've done a needs assessment, of course, the next step is the analysis of the data. Several of the agencies that we work with in the learning community, the communities of practice that I mentioned before, were able to do a fairly complete needs assessment using some of the tools that we had already looked at, and then the most difficult part was analyzing the data. Okay, so now we have this large amount of data, which includes staff, includes consumers, includes other community agencies, that, this 360 approach to assessment that looks at how other people look at you. But then with all of that data, what do we do with that? And that's where the multi-level team is important, because you have probably included in that team some of the areas where that the team members, the representatives, have told you that what helps, what doesn't help, how to go about it, etc. So the analysis of the data is something that requires the time, requires the effort, and requires a very clear sense of where you're looking and what you're looking for. Of course, after that, after the analysis of the data comes out, it becomes critical to look at the areas that are either, there's two ways of looking at it. The areas that need most work in, and then really focus on that and put all your efforts in that, or areas that are the low-hanging fruit kind of thing. So to give the staff and to give the program the sense that something is being done, what we do is we do a area that already has some strengths, and then we move to the areas that are harder to implement. One caveat here that I want to mention, because again, we confronted that in our communities of practice groups, is that many of the programs start by saying we need staff training. Staff training becomes like anything that the program does requires staff training. I am definitely one that thinks that staff training is a very good thing to do, and it's probably something that you will have to implement, but the very important thing here is staff training for what? You know, to do an awareness training for your whole program is a critical piece of having everybody on the same page. However, any one of the trainings that we do, if they don't have a purpose, if they don't tell us where to go to, then the next week that you've done the training, the skills, the workshop, whatever you've done, is forgotten, because if there is not a practical application, if there's not a clear sense of what are you working for, what are you training for, what is the ultimate goal, and that's where it becomes really important to be very clear about your outcomes, very clear about how you're going to evaluate the progress, and that you constantly are going to evaluate the progress. So if you're doing training, that's wonderful, but what for? What do you want to see in the staff that's being trained? That becomes a critical part of the training, and I really encourage you, when we say that all of the problems of the agency are going to be solved by problems, to be very wary of that, because it always then falls back on it is the easier thing to do. Finding somebody to do training, doing good training is a very good thing, and you can find it. But knowing what you're training for and looking at evaluating the progress in the skills and in the attitudes and the values of the people that have been trained is a much more difficult thing to do. So I encourage you, anytime that you say staff training, that you know what you specifically want this staff to be doing after the training, and that you have an ongoing evaluation process of what you're training for. Okay, well, following is I have written 3 or 4 areas of go ahead, the tools. Hey, there we are. These are all trauma-informed practice guides, and all of them have some sort of evaluation assessment tools. One of them is for child welfare, one of them is, for different systems. The homelessness, the National Center for Family Homelessness has been the one that have done probably the most work on assessment, and their assessment is really focused on agencies that are following both homeless families, so that they serve the kids and they serve the adults. I'm giving you the resources so that you can go there, and again, it depends very much on what your agency is. And if you're, actually, it is not a difficult thing to do if you're working with several, some of your CAP agencies are working with several of these programs. For example, it's not uncommon to see that you're working with homeless families, that there is a homeless shelter, or but there is also the early care an education provider. So you're providing the families, the homeless, the services, but you're also providing a Head Start program or a child care program, infant and child care, et cetera. So it is not difficult to combine, but many of these assessment and planning tools, as I said, are designed specifically for one group. You can see here that I have a resource for women, for working with women. Well, all of you work with women. That's not, that's part of what you do. And so some of them can be combined, and some of them just have, again, the specific area of resource. When you're working towards a trauma-informed organization, there are 4 things that the organization needs to focus on. And it is what they call the 4 R's. The first one is realizes. And by realizes, I mean they know what trauma is. Some of the questions that I posed at the very beginning of the webinar today, realize that trauma is a factor in most of the families that you're serving. Realize the impact on trauma and adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, complex stress, on all the aspects of behavior. And so when you have a trauma, as you all have heard throughout all of these webinars, you have a thinking brain and you have a feeling brain. And so when the thinking brain, when you are in front of trauma or a trigger of trauma or a remembrance of trauma, your thinking brain stops working. And so all you're doing is you're reacting with your body. And I'm talking with about children and about adults. So realizing what trauma is, the impact that it has on the population you're serving becomes a critical part of all the work that you're going to be doing, because everything that you're going to be doing, from setting up the reception area to all the evaluation tools, to all your policies, your procedures, everything is going to be looked at from the perspective of trauma. Your board, your executive members, your managers, your supervisors, your staff, everybody needs to really understand what trauma is and how it impacts the families that you're serving. And recognize, this is the second one. We're going to be talking in a couple of seconds about screening and about assessment as an important piece of trauma-informed organizations. However, recognizing also means that everyone on the staff recognizing what may be some of the signs and symptoms of either kids, youth, adults, women that have been exposed to traumatic circumstances, recognizes what traumatic stress is. It is very common to, especially with children, but also with adults, to confuse what the impact of trauma is on some of the more typical ways that behavior manifests itself. And for example, it's common that kids that have been exposed to traumatic events, to violence, may act in the classroom with behaviors that resemble attention deficit disorder, conduct disorder, and in women it may be covered by depression, alcohol use, drug use, and what we need to recognize is, if we realize that most of the folks that we're working with are impacted by trauma, we need to recognize what are some of the signs that it may be caused, and not always is going to be the case, but that this behavior that we're seeing now in whatever age in the developmental spectrum we are, may be caused by trauma. Most of the folks that are exposed to trauma do not come in and say, I've been exposed to trauma. So it is up to you staff, and again, I'm stressing the fact that it's all of the staff, it's the supervisors, it's the frontline providers, it's the people who do the cleaning, it's the receptionists that may be able to know that this is something that needs to be looked at. Of course, the third R refers to responding, how you respond to a person that has been exposed to trauma or that you think may be exposed to trauma and yet you're not sure, because the response may be different in terms of planning for services, but it may be the same for the way that you let this person know that you're interested to know what happened to them and not what's wrong with them. And the last one is called resist, and what it is that it resists the amount of events in the environment that you're producing that may trigger a response that is similar to the original response of trauma. So we talked about re-traumatization, and it may be events that for one person do not mean anything, but for other people may be very, very reminders, big reminders of what caused the trauma in the first place. Noises, places, safety places in where you are. With children, for example, very punitive behavior, violent behavior in the classroom. Ways you deal with the violent behavior may be something that triggers a response from a child, for example, that has been exposed to domestic violence. So looking at triggers, possible triggers, and resisting the re-traumatization of those areas are what we're looking for as we build this organization. So as we go along now with the areas that we're going to be looking about, I want you to think about how we are going to strengthen, or we're going to look at the 4 responses, you know, in terms of realizing what's happening or what may have happened to your population, responding in appropriate ways, revisiting re-traumatization. The first area of becoming trauma-informed is what we call the creating a safe environment. A safe environment is one with, and again, this is going to change with whatever the other. Whatever the age of the child is, where a child or an adult feels psychologically safe. And what does that mean? In a classroom setting, how do you feel safe? Well, you feel safe by having a predictable environment. You feel safe by having control over what you can and you cannot do. You feel safe in whatever age you are by knowing the expectation. You start not feeling safe when the environment around you is not one that you can control, that you can feel that you have some possibility of being at risk. And so creating a safe environment, and again, there's many areas depending on what population you're serving and what your outcomes are that you need to look at. They're very in the self-assessment instruments that you're going to be looking at that I mentioned there. There is many areas where you can look at how do you create a safe environment. In a domestic violence shelter, for example, to having a very clear space where the victim of domestic violence will feel that nobody can interfere. The confidentiality is very important. The predictability is very important, etc. In terms of children, routines are very important for creating a safe environment. And again, many of these areas that we're going to be talking about are areas that you already think about and that you already put in place. So idea is, when you're doing an assessment, is to really look at what is already there in terms of, with the lens of a trauma-informed practice that will tell you that that's being done. And it may be a strength, and it may be already there, and that's great. And you can build from that to move to the next level. The next one, of course, is what we've been talking about a lot, about staff development and staff support. And again, this is the one area that all of the agencies that are working with us on the communities of practice stress, and that their staff is, first of all, comes most of the time from the environment where the families that they serve are, and therefore we can assume that many of the staff too have been exposed to violence, have been exposed to traumatic events. And so when they're dealing with children or with youth or with adults that have that are traumatized, get re-traumatized, re-victimized, and it serves as a trigger for their own traumatic experience. It also, the emotional stress that arises in them can be very detrimental, not only to themselves as their body and their mind suffer, but also to their services. If you are very stressed when you're working with children or when you're working with adults, it would be hard to do what you need to do. So in staff development and support, the idea is that there should be a very systematic way to address the emotional stress of staff. Yes, training for trauma is critically important. Yes, awareness and workforce development is critically important, but I stress this again, and I'll tell you many, many times, it's not training for training itself. It's training for a purpose. It's what you want the staff to learn, what for, how are you going to evaluate that whatever the staff has learned and you've done in training is one that is going to be followed up. And if our staff, and there always is staff that have a more difficult time to continue with or to put in practice what you've trained, how are you going to support? What resources do you need, et cetera? So the staff development and support. The next one. And this is one that we said before, that one of the second area of the second R in our list of R's, in our list of R's that we mentioned was that the first one was, realizes, which is bring up the awareness, which of course is an important key. The second one is, how do you recognize? And we are sometimes, we are more likely to look at the signs and symptoms of early trauma on the children or the youth or the adults we serve that we are on the staff that that are serving these kids. Or there are some very many ways that we look at staff. We know that they may have some strengths and some weaknesses. We use supervision, we use coaching, we use other methods to support them, but we're not always very good at, and I'm not saying all of you, but some of us are not very good at looking at anger in staff, or alcohol and drugs in staff, and maybe not in the agency when they're serving, but in their own life. So it is very, very important that we look at, we call it compassion fatigue, which is, the emotional stress of working with families that are going to be doing that. And we do most of the time talk about staff training is an important and needed component of becoming trauma-informed. We not always need to, are more willing or have the resources to deal with putting in place ways to promote the staff resilience. So what is the environment that staff need? Is there a place where they can have a break? We do sometimes, and most of the agencies are very good at providing supervision, at doing cards for Teacher's Day or for Young Child's Day, and providing some incentives for staff. But the day-to-day work that staff is doing in the day-to-day ways that we can promote staff resilience are very important. And again, as you're looking at staff training, please also look at ways to promote staff resilience. So the next area of work, we talked about the safe environment, we talked about the staff support. The next area is really sort of the nitty-gritty of your services. What is it that you're there to do? What's the practice? What is the population you're serving? What are the issues that this population faces? What are your outcomes? What are the outcomes that you are evaluating and that you have to respond to, either from your funding sources, from your, the law, whatever it is? What are your outcomes? And so, in terms of your practice, again, all of this is very, very related to what what you're there for, your mission, the reason for you to exist. And in whatever circumstance you are there, there needs to be a process to screen and an available source of assessment for all of your participants. And we're coming back to the issue of prevalence. If most of your staff, if most of your population has been exposed to trauma or has had adverse childhood experiences, there is a way that we need to find out whether it's impacting on what they're doing or not. This is not, it sounds a lot easier to say than to do. Why? Because people do not always link their behavior to what they've gone through before. What they're looking at is what they're going through right now. What they're there, many of them are there because they want to solve the problem now, to take away the pain now. And it's hard for them to link that to something that has happened many, many years ago. There are instruments for screening, brief screenings that can be done by non-professional staff. The assessments are generally done by a mental health practitioner, and assessments are done when it is determined that there are reasons to believe from the screening that there is trauma in the life history of the individual you're talking about. I always like to say, because my field of work has been early childhood, that screening and assessment, of course, is critically important, but as good as screening is observation. For child care providers, for Head Start providers, there is really very little screening that you can do. You can do screening with the families, with the parents, and ask the parents where the child has been, but for a staff, a caregiver, or a parent to know whether this child is being exposed to violence, or if you know that they have been exposed to violence, where there is impact in their behavior may be caused by this violence, the important thing is to do observation, and not one-time observation, but look at the pattern, at the trends of the children in the classroom. So when we say recognizes, we need to know what are some of the signs and symptoms of kids that have been exposed to violence at whatever age, of youth, of adults. And those screening helps because it gives you sort of a set of questions that you can ask. Many people are not willing to share that information with you, either because it's very private information, because they have been shamed about it, or also because they don't link what is happening to them to something that happened many, many times ago. So in any kind of the intake and protocols that you have, it's a good issue to have on the intake protocol, because it gives you the chance to talk to the adults about it, and not to say, have you been this or that, but as you're talking to that person, understanding their history of trauma, and also in the case of parents, the children's trauma exposure. So you're asking the parents about them. You can also find out about the parents what is happening. The screening for trauma. Let's see. Let's go to the next one. This is the same. It's a routine thing. That's another thing that observation and screening are ongoing issues that need not to be at one time only. Only by screening, only by observation can we determine whether this range of reactions are caused by potential traumatic events. Assessment, as I said, is a kind of a different story. If you have reason to believe that this person is being impacted by violence, by adverse childhood experiences, usually the referral is by a staff, a mental health consultant, person to a professional who can do that. Most of the assessments for trauma are done by professionals, and it is important to do it that way because it's going to be used to refer for treatment. So once you have the screening, if you believe that there is reason for further assessment, the importance is to refer the child or the adult to assessment. And here, of course, a caveat, all of you know this, but it is important to use culturally and gender-appropriate assessments, because it is very easy to confuse trauma impacts with other issues that are happening, or sometimes with different ways of understanding what's happening. And the screening, the observation, and the assessment is not worth anything if we don't use it for trauma, for intervention. And so interventions are, most of the people you're working with are not going to get to go to mental health intervention. Neither we probably want them to go to mental health intervention, although sometimes it's necessary, but most of the people are going to have to be responded in the place where they are, in the services that you're doing. So what you're working towards is not necessarily to send to therapy, but become a therapeutic environment. And that does not mean at all that all of you have to become therapists. It does mean that we need to respond, as we say, with safety, with knowledge about what are the best treatments, the best strategies to work with certain problems or concerns that we have. Also, in this sense, it's very important, as you do in the assessment and the screening, to look at the strengths, because you're going to be using the strengths of each one of the strengths to be able to do your planning and your assessment and use that. The next level, so you're going to be looking at the safety of the environment. You're going to look at the staff from the knowledge and the support that they need. You're going to be planning your services, or rearranging your services when it's not clinical services. It's rearranging the services that you provide based on the assessment, the observation, screening, and assessment. Then the next one is to provide resources. We sometimes fail to acknowledge that the families that we're serving, depending, of course, of their age, are it's important for them to know where they can go. It's important for them to know what's going on to them. You would be surprised to know how when they read some of the easy-to-read fact sheets about what the impact of trauma is, and they recognize many of their symptoms, they will be a lot more able to understand why you're doing certain things with them or why you're asking them to do certain things with their children. And why, even if sometimes it is very frustrating to be feeling the pain and relating to other folks and children, etc., that the reason why they're acting this way is because of the trauma, and that they can heal, they can progress, they can move forward. And the last one is the adapting of policies and procedures. It is important to do, again, and I will repeat that until you're tired of hearing me, it's important to do training, because training, of course, is going to help in many ways. But the way that you do the written policies, the way that you focus on confidentiality, the way that the policies demonstrate your commitment to staff with financial resources, with everything else, becomes very important. When you're revising your policies and your procedures, most of them will be there already, but there has to be a very concrete way of having the policies address the fact that the trauma is pervasive, and that there is a commitment at all levels of the staff and the board to promote the well-being and to promote recovery. Sometimes if it's not written down somewhere, it's not done. So it is important that these issues are included in your assessment. And again, very, very many, all of the resources that I pointed you to have ways of looking at the staff. And the one thing also that becomes very important, we talked at the very beginning when we started about where do you get started to form a multi-level group, is that you need staff and participant input. Many times all of these new quote-unquote initiatives, or you get funding to do something, leaves out the staff that are going to implement it, input, or the participants that are going to be recipients to do it. How many times do you go to policy council meetings or participant meetings, consumer meetings, and they are told this is what we're going to do and we need you to sign on them because this is what we need to do the grant. I've been there and done that, so I can tell you that it's the easiest thing to do. If we don't really get people that have lived experiences to have opportunities to share their thoughts, it would be very hard to understand really what helps and what doesn't help. Many of the issues that we can implement are going to identify strategies that are going to be helpful because they come from the same people that are limiting them, that are providing them. So tell me what it's critically important, again, that maybe it could be done on one-on-one. Maybe it's hard to get all parents or all families or all recipients to come to the same place at the same time. I know what it is to call a meeting and have two people coming, etc. But you can do it if you do one-to-one, you can ask. If you do smaller groups, if you want, if you do it as part of some other kind of service that you're providing, intake, whatever, that you can ask and get participant input. And not only at the beginning, but ongoing. As you are implementing your program and you're looking at ongoing evaluation, as you're doing evaluation of training, a critical thing is to ask the people that received the training or that are implementing a program to see how how is it going? What else do they need? This is not, doing a agency assessment is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing event that generally requires a lot of tweaking and revising. And we've seen that too in the groups that we're working with. When you have a program that starts with a lot of enthusiasm, and we're going to do this, and we're committed to this, they go on overdrive, and then a staff member who has been pushing it leaves, or there is a downturn in the community, either a natural disaster or something that happens that stops what's happening and pushes you to focus on something else. Or the one that's typical, a grant announcement comes out and most of the staff that really has the time that's not providing direct services is pulled on to do that kind of work. So we get so fast, it becomes just an added initiative. It does not become a committed initiative at all levels of the organization, and it's pushed to the bottom of the line. So if you have staff and participant input, if you have a multi-level team that is pushing and working for this, they become the advocates. You need advocates for this in your program, because we as an agency, and as a CAP agency and many of the human services agencies, face so many critical things every day that it's very hard to focus on one thing that we consider that's not a priority. And we may talk about a priority and we may relegate it to training, but the issue is if you don't make this part of what you're doing every day, it's very hard not to be distracted, to say the least. And not because anybody is lazy or bad or not following through. It's just that there's so many other things that come into life. So with that, I'm going to ask for you, how difficult do you think it would be to implement a trauma-informed approach in your organization? Very difficult, somewhat difficult, not difficult at all.
Right, so the poll should be showing up on your screen. We'll give you guys about a minute to go ahead and send in your responses, and then again we'll display them on the screen for you. So if you haven't done so already, please answer the poll.
Wow, this is great. Looks good.
So we see your responses coming in. Thank you. And we can see there are a few more of you that haven't taken the poll. Please do so. There's only one question. We really appreciate your feedback, and it will help to add to future presentations that we do on this topic. So please do. We appreciate it. You have about 10 more seconds to answer. All right. We are going to close the poll, and we're going to display the results for you in just a second. All right, so it looks like most of the attendees that are still with us said they felt it would be somewhat difficult to implement an approach at this time, about 19 people. The next highest response was, actually, it's a tie between very difficult and not difficult.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. And so the following question I'd like to ask, because you say that it's somewhat difficult, and some of you said it was very, very difficult. What would you say is the biggest barrier to your efforts to become trauma-informed?
Okay, this poll is now open for you all too. So,
and the responses are resources, fiscal or other, agency competing priorities, adapting policies and procedures, staff training, lack of support from leadership, or not knowing where to start.
Yep, so you'll have about a minute to answer. You have about 30 seconds left, so if you haven't done so, again, please answer this poll. I think it's the last one.
Yeah, it is the last one. I won't bother you with more.
And if you do have any other questions about maybe content that wasn't covered, we actually are going to hold for a few minutes after this for Q&A.
Absolutely.
So please send in any questions that you have through the chat box, and we'd be happy to address them. One question that I have gotten quite frequently, this event is recorded and the slides will be made available, both through a follow-up email and also on the partnership's website. So if you want to go back and look at some of the resources that have been shared and some of the other topics that we're going to talk about, they're all going to be there for you in the slides. So if you just hang tight with us for a couple of days, you'll see that. All right, so thank you for your responses. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to close the poll. So give us a few seconds and we'll be able to display the results for you guys on the screen. So hang on for just a minute. Right, so display them there for you guys, but it looks like we have a pretty widespread some results, but it looks like most people said that either resources, competing agency priorities, and also staff training seems to be the biggest barrier, and then after that people just said simply not knowing where to start seems to be our top responses. So
interesting. Well, there are, again, many resources that we have shared throughout the webinars before. We're happy to respond to any question now. And also, I think you're going to plan to do this, but I'm just going to pull the plug right now. If you are able and willing, on May 25th, we're going to have our program, some of the programs that participated in the communities of practice, talk about their experience doing their usual. Thank you. And so I would ask you to, because some of them have dealt with the issues that you're talking about, like competing priorities or not knowing where to start, etc. And so it'd be helpful for you to hear from your colleagues how they've done, how the work that they have been doing, some of the barriers that we have faced, and some of the accomplishments that we have done.
Thanks for that, Elena. Oops, back a little bit too far. So one comment that we did have in, someone wanted to clarify that one of their boundaries that they're facing is that there is training for their staff and there is buy-in from their staff, but we don't always have the right staff for this approach. And as you said, we can train people as much as we want, but if they don't implement it, then it's kind of a fruitless effort.
This is a very good question, because it almost implies that you need specialized staff to be implementing this. I don't know, the person who made this comment, I don't know where you work, but what I'm saying is that there are many strategies that folks that have not necessarily been trained as a mental health consultant or something like that can do. And so you don't need, you do not need to have specialized staff. You do need, when you do your outreach for staff and your interviewing with new staff as part of your policies and procedures, is who are you hiring for that. But the truth is that that you can train forever, as you said, and it's futile, but you can also train the staff for the work that you're doing to implement a trauma-informed approach. I do not want to sound like in order to implement a trauma-informed approach, you need very specialized staff. What you need is to have somebody knowledgeable about the population that you're serving and help that staff get there. So teachers, child care providers, youth development persons, tell me what there's some of you that do weatherization. There's some of you that do, of course, homeless services for homeless families. All of that staff can be trained and can be helped and support, maybe not in trainings like we are used to thinking about training, but in coaching and supervising and modeling and being with that person as it is.
Thank you for that, Elena. So another comment that came in, someone said, thank you so much for this. This has been extremely insightful, and I'm going to hand out the slides to share with the administration at our agency. After all of these years of working at our organization, I'm very thrilled to see this type of training available.
It's great.
Great.
That's great. And again, in one of the previous webinars, I can't remember which one it was, but in one of them, we did do a whole lot of resources on training. And again, training is very important, but we need to know what we're training for. And if the person that's asking about training and about giving this to your board or to your managers, if you want to call in or write us, we will be happy to supply you with the resources that you need.
Okay. And you'll see my contact information at the end of this presentation. So if you are interested in specific resources on some of the more specific aspects of what we talked about today, please feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to connect you to those resources. I don't think we have had any other comments or questions come in. So with that, I think I'm going to thank Elena for her presentation and her sharing her resources and expertise with us. So thank you very much for your insightful comments and guidance for our agency. So just a couple of quick notes on our end here on the partnership. So as Elena mentioned, we are going to be having a webinar next month where members of our trauma-informed approaches to alleviating poverty learning community group are going to be sharing some of their experiences and major lessons learned from their participation in this cohort for the last 16 months. So they have been hard at work developing plans, and for the last few months they've actually been implementing their work to make their organizations trauma-informed. So if you're interested in this topic, we highly encourage you to attend that event. I think we have a good spread of different types and levels of organizations that are working to make themselves more trauma-informed. They're going to be presenting. We're going to be hearing from the CAP agency. I think we have a state association that's going to be sharing some insight. And then I think we have someone from a government office that's going to be sharing their work with trauma-informed approaches and how they're working with both their constituents and their clients to make their communities more trauma-informed. So we really hope that you join us for that event. Again, that's going to be on Thursday, May 25th. And also, as a part of this webinar series, the day before, May 24th, you actually will have the opportunity to hear from some participants in our Financial Empowerment for Families, LCG. So please mark your calendars for those two webinar dates, and if you're interested, we hope that you will join us there. Outside of that webinar, those two events in our webinar mini-series, we also have some other webinar events coming up a little bit later. Last week, we launched our Health Intersections LCG, which focuses on different aspects of health and human services and how they connect with what we do here in the Community Action Network. The first webinar talked about the social determinants of health, and this next one that we have coming up on May 31st is going to talk about the intersection of housing and health. So if you are interested in that topic, please be sure to register for this event. You can actually click on the hyperlinked title on your screen, and it'll take you to the registration page if you're interested. Another event that we are excited to announce will be taking place on June 13th, and this is the launch of a new mini-series for the National Webinar Series, and this is going to be showcasing the work of the Futures Project, which you can see here in the description is a collaborative initiative between community action agencies in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, and they're going to be talking about their work with theory of change as it relates to understanding national trends in poverty and trends in their community and how they can transform their organization's mindset to be more impactful in their service area. So again, we'd like to see a lot of you at that event, so we hope that you join us on June 13th. Please give us your feedback. We really do try to be mindful, as the information shared today, Elena mentioned, was really curated based on the information that you shared with us and information that we've had from similar webinar events where we talked about trauma-informed approaches. We really do take your feedback to heart, and we do try to incorporate it into what we do. So if you have just a few moments, we would highly encourage you to take the survey and just let us know how we did. Here is the contact information not only for myself but for everyone else in the Training and Technical Assistance Department here at the partnership. Please feel free to reach out to any of us with questions, concerns, comments, thoughts. We would love to hear from you. Finally, next week, May is already here. I know, I can't believe it either. But May is going to be here next week, and we all know what that means in our network. That means it's Community Action Month. And we are very excited to announce that, if you haven't heard already, our 2017 Community Action Month Toolkit is now available on our website. There is a picture of the cover there. You can also click on the link here, and that should take you directly to download it. But there you can find information on activities, events, social media posts, talking points. There's an events calendar. There's some memes that we have for you guys to share throughout the month. So a lot of great content for us to talk about how we help give people a helping hand out of poverty, as I mentioned here on the previous slide. But throughout the month, we encourage you not only to use the information in the toolkit, but we want you to be really active on social media. So please keep us involved in what you're doing and let us know. And you can do so by using the hashtags either #BeCommunityAction or #CommunityAction. We're really excited to see what you guys are doing, and as you know, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So please share your activities and what you guys are thinking about and saying during Community Action Month. Finally, a shameless plug for our annual convention, which is going to be taking place August 29th through September 1st, and we're going to be in Philly this year. So again, registration is live and up on our website. There you can find more information about the event itself, hotel rates, and some other activities that we are still in the process of planning. But if you haven't registered already, I can encourage you that it's going to be a big event. We have a lot of cool things planned and underway, so we really encourage you guys to join us if you haven't registered already. So with all of that being said, this is going to conclude our webinar presentation for today. Thanks again, Alicia, for presenting and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. And that's it. So have a great day. Thank you.
Do you want attendees? No. Do you want attendees?